Looking at the streaming landscape first, what types of things do you think that streaming services might need to do to differentiate themselves more and more, given that we've got things like price points that are essentially completely the same? Sulinna, I'm looking at you.
I'm the first one. OK, I'm going to open up. All right. For us at Deezer, we have a few things that we feel differentiate us from our competitors. Especially on my side, I'm on the front line of dealing with artists and labels and managers. It's important to us to be artist-friendly. And really, whenever we're thinking about working with artists, thinking about how we can genuinely play a meaningful part in developing artists' careers. So that's looking at supporting new and developing artists, but also looking at questioning the status quo of how things are at the moment. And one of the things that we're looking at the moment and working on is user-centric payment. Some of you are probably aware that at the moment, all streaming companies pay royalties to rights holders based on a black box system. So that's based on market share. And what user-centric payment is, which we feel is important and we're looking at taking steps to transfer to, is with the cooperation of everyone else as well, and rights holders, is simply paying a more transparent, fairer payment system. That means for the 10 euros a month that you pay for your subscription, if you choose to stream Metallica 100% of the time, your 10 euros will be going to that artist and not split according to a broader pot and market share. And that's a much simpler, transparent way of paying artists. So that's one of the things that is a big priority for us. And the other thing that's a priority for us is really localization. So making sure that wherever you are in the world, Deezer's in 180 countries, that you're seeing local content and artists that are relevant, and not the same 50 global artists.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you brought up the user-centric licensing point, because it does feel like a really important development that's going to start to shift some of the segmentation with audiences as well. At Boiler Room and at Media, we've started to see that audiences are responding much more strongly to ideas about artist payments and things like that being fair. I've got to say, though, when you guys announced it, it was kind of it didn't have maybe the waves that I was maybe expecting for something that's actually pretty significant in terms of what's actually a very controversial space. How much more are you going to sort of put that at the heart of what you guys do in a public-facing sense?
It's going to be increasingly so. I mean, the fact that I'm talking about it now, I mean, that's it involves a lot of stakeholders. I wish it was just us that could make this decision and just switch it on, but it involves cooperation from the rights holders. And at the moment, we're talking to a lot of people, educating people about, about what this means or what this might mean. Artists and managers get it immediately, and labels too, when they understand that it's this transparent, fairer system, which everyone has been calling for. So yeah, it'll ramp up.
Good, I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Henrik, before you were at EQT, you were at Spotify. Could you give us a little bit of an insight about differentiation from a Spotify perspective, maybe around things like data?
Yeah. I was actually part of building that black box that you were mentioning before. No, I was at Spotify from 2010 and during 5 years building the analytics team. And I think, after now having passed 2.5 years since that point, now as an investor, I get to see, take a little bit of distance. And I can agree that it's really hard to differentiate sometimes what the difference is between these different services. And for me, if we think about what the problem or what these services are trying to solve, it's about finding a platform which helps artists who creates amazing content to find its way to fans who wants to listen to music. And I think whoever is going to help out to enhance that or help facilitate that transaction happening is going to win. And I think we're so much not there yet. We're just in the beginning. To me, we just digitalized the records from the past, put them into an app, and people can find them. But it's going to be much more around like how can someone create the best platform where artists get help to find their segments, to grow their fan base, to communicate with them, and also for that, then how will how can the services create the best experience for consumers? So get to know them, what music to play, but also like build better features for specific moments of their life when they want to listen to music, which is not just typing in the name of a song or things like that.
Yeah. And do you, I mean, the landscape has evolved so much, and before the payments to artists seemed sort of like sketchy at best. We've now moved into a stage where the global recorded music industry revenues are finally starting to grow at the rates that people had traditionally experienced. From that perspective, do you think consumers are looking at streaming services and thinking, oh yeah, this is all about the artists? Or do you think they might be thinking that there are other power dynamics at play?
I think it's really a combination of everything. I think we're riding together this digital wave where we're finally putting music consumption back into the digital lives of consumers and artists, and that I think is what drives the whole positive development.
Cool. It's still evolving. Henrik, sorry, Meindert. From Spinning Records, you guys had a kind of a slightly different approach and had a huge amount of success with YouTube. Could you maybe talk us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think if you pan out a little bit, I think we're now, if you look at all the streaming services, we're now in the phase where it's kind of still a land grab for the, the biggest market share, and everybody's trying to do, everything they can to get as much users. And YouTube is, of course, is a different beast because it's tradition. I'm not talking about the YouTube Music application that was launched this week, but I'm talking about the YouTube Classic, so to say. And that's always geared around user-generated content. So, and if you're a rights holder, you can be really creative with what you're going to give to the community and what you get back. In the Spinnin's case, there was a lot of subscribers. So YouTube is different in a way that it's really flexible. It also is one of the platforms that has the best direct-to-consumer communication options, which obviously opens a lot of doors for marketing for companies like, for labels or advertising agencies or whatever. So, yeah, that's where YouTube fits in somehow.
Nice, and also from a label perspective, I mean, obviously the things that streaming services did that's very different to how the industry ran before was the volume of data that labels now have at their fingertips. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about the types of data points that you guys would get that you place most attention on, and whether there's any variation between the main streaming services?
Yeah, I mean, the amount of data you get back, especially from APIs of all the different platforms, that kind of defines your playing field of, what you can do. But it also defines what you can do with each and every platform. I know, we all know Spotify has a great API. You can do amazing stuff with that. I mean, you can remote control people's applications, so you can do, I don't know, a worldwide flash mob release like live. You can do all this kind of stuff, and obviously with Apple Music, that's not as easy. So yeah, the more data as a label you can get from one of the platforms, the more marketing you can do, and the more successful you can be at on a certain platform. And also, the more users you can put into the whole platform. So that's
nice.
it.
And Sulinna, from Deezer's perspective, what are the sort of key ways in which you guys are building out your data capabilities? What are your sort of the key areas that you think are sort of most important in building artist careers?
In using data, sorry?
In using data, yeah.
So, I mean, data's always in the middle of how we approach everything that we do. And usually, data's always referred to as this big nebulous thing. It's like all these numbers everywhere. But essentially, the hardest part of working with data is being able to form the right conclusions. And yes, when you are inundated with a lot of data, because we see quite a number of things, we look at how our users are listening. If you like to listen in your car while you're commuting, on your mobile, at home, through a hi-fi system, and really taking that and forming the right conclusions, or the right hypothesis, I should say, because nothing is really a conclusion. There are so many variables. So it's a combination of these things. I'm always, a lot of the arguments that are set up in music is this versus that. It's very dualistic, AI versus human creation. Now, these two things really should work seamlessly. We use data to enhance our productivity, But also, we look at things that happen outside. For example, when we're choosing artists that we work with on Deezer Next, which is how we work with new and developing artists, it's our development program, we look at everything that's happening outside of Deezer as well. We look at their touring schedule, the socials, the music, obviously, is the most important thing. So all of these things come into play. It's not an either-or situation. Data really enhances and gives you insights on what you're already doing.
Nice. And I guess building on that point, the volume of data is extreme, and it's nice to hear the nuances with which you guys are treating that. Some people, from a sort of creator's perspective and maybe a label's perspective, have been talking a little bit about the fact that they're concerned that maybe an over-reliance on data, i.e. knowing what was successful on streaming services previously, might be leading to sort of like a reduction in risk-taking in creativity. Is that something that you guys think about from a label's point of view?
Well, yeah. As a label, I think you can think about that. I mean, if you have a lot of data, it can withhold you from taking certain risks. Especially if you look at, the biggest releases of spinning records of the last 10 years. For instance, Animals by Martin Garrix. We didn't know it was going to be that big of a hit. And suppose you had like all the data available, what would the data have said? Maybe it would have said, sorry, this track is too empty. This sounds weird. Don't sign it. So sometimes a leap of faith is really important to get success. So maybe if you're getting too over-reliant on data, it can backfire. But as long as you use it as a smart tool, I think it's really helpful.
Nice. And what about, Spotify is it's the data beast. You guys log, or your previous company logged out, it's like 150 billion data points a day, I think, which is kind of bananas. How central to the philosophy of what they wanted to put forward do you think data was at Spotify?
Sorry.
How central do you think Spotify saw data as a part of their brand? Like, how key was it?
It was. I think we were very early using data across the organization. We started ever since the start, because we had great engineers that picked up on this big data trend very early. So we started to use data everywhere and kind of learned along with the rest of the world, like how to have a growth mentality. How you can actually develop the product better, if you measure things, if you drive insights, and if you experiment with A/B tests and things like that. Since we did that early on, we that mindset really spread across the organization. And I think that has learned the company, teach the company a lot of things during that journey. And I think you can apply that for so many different things, for artists as well. So if we started to do that internally, and now you provide the tools to let other labels and artists do that themselves. Like, how can you provide the tools to let them to do growth hacking, for example? And that mentality is I think, spearheading, and I think everyone, or all these services should help others to do that.
So there are clearly some super useful applications of it from an artist's perspective in building artist careers with Spotify Next and Deezer's local program. From a sort of labels perspective in terms of building artists these days and whether or not labels are still relevant, you've got services like Platoon and these giant digital distributors that are sort of bypassing labels these days. How do you think in this streaming landscape labels can still make themselves relevant? What do they need to do?
Well, I think you have to look at you have to redefine a label and really look at where a label adds value. So I think there's a few points where a label adds value. First of all, I think it's the music. Starting with A&R. For those who don't know it, the A&R manager is the person that selects or decides whether or not a track is signed. Now, that person is not only selecting, it's not only curating, it's actually helping the artist go back and forth with that track and adding value to the music. So that's a very important added value from a label perspective. But with that, you also kind of tell a story with kind of a standard of quality that you want to put out as a label. So you say, okay, these are the artists that we are supporting. This is the sound that we are representing. And with that, you can create a really powerful brand that has added value to the artist careers as well. So, and with that, as a third point, it's the old economies of scale, so to say. So if you do a lot of releases, you get a lot of data back. So with that data, you can better promote the releases that comes, the week afterwards. So with that, you get a lot of know-how, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of added value. But I think if you think about that and redefine a label, then I think labels should act more like an advertising or marketing company than maybe a label does now, involving the whole supply chain and managing rights, etc.
Sure, we're certainly moving into this sort of like hybrid stage where labels can mean many different things depending on the types of deals that are arranged, etc. I've kind of got a question about finances now and labels, because this is kind of like a really sticky issue and it's kind of going to be around probably for a lot longer. When you start to dig into how much money artists make on streaming services from their output these days, there are actually some pretty significant differences depending on whether artists go with major labels, independent labels, or they take kind of distributor routes. From your guys' perspectives, like how important do you think sort of public knowledge about these finances is going to be in people's perceptions about which type of services to use, which type of labels to go with? Do you think it's going to become sort of like a social good aspect of these brands when people really start to understand how these finances work? Or do you think it's still going to remain relatively vague for most people?
I think it's about, it's a choice that an artist makes. I mean, we're still in a phase where the artist makes most of his money with live gigs. So if there's differences in money flowing, it's okay. Do I choose to go with an artist program on, for instance, a streaming platform? Do I go with an independent label that does all this marketing for me, or do I do it all by myself and go it through, I don't know, Cobalt or something, or a service like that? So yeah, that's a choice. But so if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's good. Did you guys have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, what streaming has done, and just the advancement in technology and where we are, is it's opened up a lot of choice in the way that you choose to release something. You're not locked in to the traditional, album. You go to radio 6 to 8 weeks up front of a single. So it's thrown up a lot of choice. And as has been mentioned before, I think the key really, as has always been the case, is that artists don't appear fully formed out of nowhere. There's a lot of development work that goes into an artist's career, and even when they're breaking or trending, you haven't seen all the groundwork that's been done before on the A&R side, and et cetera, et cetera. So an artist needs a good team. There are lots of choices for them now, and they really should be working with a lot of people and educate themselves on what their deal is and what their plan is, and that's how to approach it.
Nice. We haven't got that much time left. There's a bunch of new technologies that are sort of like dipping in and out of this space. Things like AI-generated composition and voice-activated listening. Yeah. Looking at that spread, are there any things that really make you guys feel excited that the next wave of disruption is going to be really significant in how people consume music? Anything that you're into?
I can start with, there are so many trends, and now being on the investor side, I have so much, insights and opportunities to meet teams that are building great things at the very early stage in this technology for music. And one of the most interesting trends is, I think, around AI and music, and that for many people might sound like science fiction, and it did to me too. Like a year ago, I didn't believe it, but hearing how people are now with AI creating completely new music, and also how they're creating like shape-shifting music. They take one track, they can shift the genre, the tempo, the style, everything. That's really amazing, and that, to me, is going to be really interesting to see how artists will embrace that as a tool for how they create music, and how they can maybe create much more variations and reach out to new groups of consumers. So that's one trend.
Nice.
I think for us at the moment, voice activation is something that's here now. It's something that's going to be more important as we go along, and so we're looking at, well, how does that change the behavior in terms of how people listen to music? For example, lyrics in the metadata are important now. Play me that song that goes like this. So that's going to be an interesting space that we're focused on, and really how that's going to unfold is going to be interesting to see. I generally tend to not make grand proclamations about what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years, because tech...
No, you did.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, voice activation, for me, that's that's a key area.
Yeah, I think AI is creeping into music production. Plugins are getting smarter. Recommendations are getting better and better. But also voice is really interesting because everybody's. I like the angle that you shouldn't focus maybe less on the technology, but more on the ignorance or relative stupidity of a human being, and see how many keywords or brands can a person remember when you have to find your music without any context. So I think the branding side, like I explained, with why a label has value, is going to be really important, because if you have a strong brand that's planted in somebody's head, somebody's more eager to say, okay, just play me Spinning Records music, and there you go. Or maybe it will go that far that Alexa will immediately know what kind of music you want to hear because she knows you had a bad day. I don't know. We'll see. But it's interesting.
Nice. It's going to be exciting to watch how it unfolds. So yeah, let's hope that in 10 years, because I believe that you were here 10 years ago.
Yeah. I was thinking yesterday that when I started working at Spinning 10 years ago, I worked at Spinning a month, I think, and there was a conference right here, and it was called Picnic, and it was kind of the same setting, not a school, obviously, and but we had the same conversation. There was the same conversation. I was not in it, but there was the same conversation. And there was this guy who called himself a futurist, and he said, "Okay, labels are going to be done within 2 or 3 years. It's it's all DIY now. Forget it. It's going to be over." And I was like, "No, it's not going to be over." And now we're here 10 years later, and the labels are doing better than ever. So let's check in 10 years and see.
Yeah, 100%. I'm pretty sure Benji's going to have some.
But they have to adapt.
They have to adapt.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for your time. Enjoy your afternoon.